After the Second World War, the world faced a problem it had never encountered before. How do you judge crimes so vast, so systematic, that they seem to exceed the limits of law itself? That question sits at the heart of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, the remarkable book by Jack L. High, which tells the true story of Douglas Kelley, the American Army psychiatrist tasked with evaluating Nazi leaders, including Hermann Göring, on the eve of the Nuremberg Trials. It's also the moral and psychological terrain explored in the new film Nuremberg, starring Russell Crowe, which brings the drama of post-war justice to the screen and asks enduring questions about evil, responsibility, and whether monsters are born or made. Today, I'm joined by Jack L. High to talk about the real history behind the trials, the psychological battle unfolding behind closed doors, and how his meticulously researched book converses with and sometimes challenges the story told on film. This is a conversation about justice after atrocity, the limits of understanding, and what happens when history forces us to look directly into the mind of evil and recognize something uncomfortably human staring back. I'm Jason Herbert, and this is A Reckoning. My name is Jason Herbert. I'm a Southerner who lives in the West. I'm a historian, an outdoorsman, and a movie buff. I like finding new answers to old questions, and this is A Reckoning. You're in Minneapolis now. I think I told you I did my graduate school there.
I don't remember that if you told me. So when were you here?
So I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota, and did 2 years. I did 2 years. Sounds like I was actually the one incarcerated. My graduate. I did 2 years of graduate coursework at Minnesota in 2000 from 2015 through 17, and then actually finished my PhD in 2022. So. I have a love affair with that city. I absolutely love Minneapolis, St. Paul. I used to go to Stillwater a lot when I was on campus. It's like kind of like my getaway, if you will. Like once a month, just go kind of breathe a little bit. How are things up there, man? I see news, and I don't like what I'm seeing.
Yeah, the city's turned upside down. Even I live in a quiet neighborhood, but there have been ICE trucks here. That Weasley guy who's the manager of their operations, Bovino, I think his name is. He's been 2 blocks away, causing trouble, throwing smoke canisters, and a lot of people are very upset and very frightened. Many people are not going to work, not going to school, not just not going outside. There are networks set up to help with grocery deliveries because they can't go out, stuff like that. And it's really changed the character of the city.
Yeah, I've been sending money back and forth to friends of mine who are still in the Twin Cities, who are running stuff back and forth to actually indigenous communities, because I know that a lot of indigenous communities are getting hassled as well.
They are. They've gotten picked up, which is absurd. It's idiotic.
And this guy Bovino, like I've seen him walking around wearing a trench coat, which seems to have some very real parallels to our subject matter today.
Yeah, I call him pint-sized Napoleon, but he's out there. He makes sure he's out there, and he's in the fray if there's a fray, and he gets heckled mercilessly every time he shows his face in public. But he does it. He must thrive on it, or
he has to. I have to imagine for these guys that they really embrace. And I was thinking the other day, maybe the thing to do would be to show up and just watch silently or something. It's just like create some kind of different version of protest. And I've still follow a lot of the places I used to frequent when I was in Minneapolis on social media, my favorite restaurants or places like that. And I see a lot of them are going to be closed down, I think, tomorrow.
Yeah, that's because it's a kind of a general strike tomorrow.
Wow.
People aren't going to work. They're not going shopping, not going to school, just to make a statement.
Yeah. And for you listening right now, we're recording this on Thursday, the 22nd of 2026. So we're talking about tomorrow. But yeah, it's I hate it, man, because it's like I look at this, like Minneapolis is such an amazing place. People there are happy. It's like one of the happiest. I was telling my girlfriend, it's like she's never been. I was like, you gotta go to the state. We gotta go to the state fair this year. It's like it's one of the best cities in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Are you from Minnesota?
I've lived here 45 years, but I'm not from here originally. I grew up in Southern California. But obviously I love it here. I've been here a very long time, raised family here, and it's terrible to see. It's so manipulative. It doesn't seem to be about immigrants at all. It's about creating chaos and trying to upset the aims of Democrats in the governor's office, mayor's office, all of that. So it can make you cynical very fast.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw something the other day saying they're there because Minneapolis works, because the state of Minnesota works. And it's obviously not without its problems, but like the city works pretty well.
It does. It's a great place to live for, not for everyone, but for many, many people of all different backgrounds.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't even know, Jack, how we're going to segue into talking about this film and your book today, but I do want to talk about it because I read your book, spent the last 2 days watching the film as well, and we're getting into Oscar season right now. I'm kind of watching to see what films are going to get picked up and nominated. And as I've seen, Nuremberg's actually kind of picking up a little heat here with it's doing well internationally as well.
Yeah.
What's that been like for you?
Well, it is true. The box office receipts in overseas have been greater than in North America, which is unusual for an American film. This movie has been in the works for 14 years. And during much of that time, I thought nothing is happening and nothing will happen. But fortunately, because of the fortitude of James Vanderbilt, the director and screenwriter from Nuremberg, he just stuck with it and made it happen. And he's also a real devotee of history, and he wanted to tell this story as accurately, factually as possible in a movie, which isn't 100% factual,
sure,
but it's mostly factual. And I feel great that I can recommend this to my friends and not feel guilty about it, because I've seen it 3 times now in different screenings, and it's a good movie.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Russell Crowe has been one of my favorite actors for the longest time. I'm sitting here watching, I'm watching Gladiator, here, and I'm watching Jack Aubrey from Master and Commander. And now I'm seeing him in this completely different version of, kind of the guy that maybe I kind of came to as a young adult, really when he hit it big in Hollywood. But maybe that's what's fascinating here. Here on this podcast, we've had directors on the pod, we've had screenwriters on the pod, producers. We don't often get a chance to talk to someone who's actually had their own work adapted into a film.
Well, writers have all kinds of responses to this process,
right?
Because it really taxes or tests, I should say, about how you think of your own story and what you think of somebody else making sparks off of it. My approach has been that I think it's wonderful that other creative people were interested in this story and wanted to make a new creative product out of it. Something that would appeal to a different audience than my book did, and many more of them than my book did. So over the years, I reviewed 4 different drafts of James's screenplay and got better each time. And I had to do some thinking about who am I commenting as? I knew right away I did not want to be the history police. I did not want to be the person who pointed out every historical inaccuracy, and there aren't many, but there are some, because this process was all about making a good movie, and movies are different from history books. Movies are there to entertain. I hope my books entertain too, but entertain in a different way and move people emotionally. And if they can do those two things and get it mostly right in the facts, that's wonderful. So that was the aim of the commenting that I was doing over the years, to try and push it along in that direction.
I have to wonder, like, this book originally came out in 2013, if I recall correct.
Right. Yes.
You've obviously done other things since then. Has this been like this thing where you continually have to come back and kind of revisit your own work? And now it's got some heat again because the book's being re-released. The film is obviously out and so forth. Like, do you find yourself living now with Douglas Kelley? Like, what's your relationship to this book over time?
It's changed, because when I published the book in 2013, the political extremism that the Nazis represent in the book, seemed to me today, or back then in 2013, to be on the fringes of our political discussions. This was in the middle of the second Obama administration. And now it's very different. And even to me, the book reads differently. And Dr. Kelley's warnings that he gives once he has returned back to the States from Nuremberg sound differently to me. They sound more urgent. And so when I've been talking about the book and about the movie, I am stressing much more what feels to me the lessons are from the Nazi and the psychiatrist and from Nuremberg. Fortunately, they're the same lessons. So that's another reason why I like the movie. In my talks now, compared with back 12, 13 years ago, I talk more about contemporary things than I did back then.
I guess maybe the best thing to do might be to backtrack a little bit and talk about how this project came to be in the very, like, when did the idea of writing this book first germinate in your mind? What were you doing? Like, what did you think? I want to write this story about these two. How did you come to this, Jack?
I remember the exact moment because it happened while I was researching a previous book. That book was called The Lobotomist, and it's a biography of another psychiatrist. And so I was going through that psychiatrist's papers, and I read in his unpublished memoirs that in 1938 he attended a conference of the American Psychiatric Association, and there he met this unusual psychiatrist, Douglas Kelley. And he was unusual because he was at the conference not to present a paper or to present any research or anything like that. He was there to give a magic show from the stage in front of this audience of psychiatrists. What a brave thing for any stage magician to do for that kind of audience. And so that stuck in my memory. Oh, there's this psychiatrist, or there was this psychiatrist who was also a stage magician. So later on, I learned more about Dr. Kelley's career, that he, as a officer in the U.S. Army, had been in Europe at the end of World War II, working in field hospitals. And he was called first to Luxembourg and then to Nuremberg to work among the top German leadership, military and civilian, who were being held, had been arrested, and would eventually be put on trial in the first of the 13 Nuremberg trials. So that was intriguing to me too. Wow, a psychiatrist among war criminals. And then, so I started looking for Dr. Kelley's papers. I thought he must have papers. They must be archived somewhere. They weren't. And so that led me to search for family members. Dr. Kelley died in 1958, but I knew he had children. And finally, Kelley is a very common name in our country, but finally I tracked down his oldest son, Doug, living in Northern California. And I wrote to him and I said, I'm interested in writing about your father's career. Do you have anything? And he said, yes, he did. And he invited me to come and look. And I didn't know what to expect. A scrapbook, maybe, or a photo album, something like that. Well, when I got there, I saw that Doug had dragged up from his basement 15 banker's boxes full of materials that Dr. Kelley had brought back to the States from Nuremberg in 1946, and that nobody outside the Kelley family had looked at them since then. And so I started going through this. It was an incredible treasure trove. The kind of medical records and psychiatric test records you might expect, things he did with the prisoners, but also memos to the court going both directions, and artifacts. Really, one of the first things I saw when I opened the first box was a jewelry case that held a glass vial, and inside the vial were all these red pills, and the vial was labeled Hermann Göring's percodine. And that's when I first learned that Göring, when he was arrested, had been addicted to this narcotic, and Kelley had weaned him off of it before the trial began. And that's really how Kelley's relationship with Göring began, to help him rid himself of this addiction, which had been going on for years and years. So that's how it began. I made many return trips to Doug's house and went through everything. And I saw this could be the foundation of a really intriguing book.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between yourself and the Kelley family? I can't imagine the pressure maybe that you might be under to tell the story of this man. And of course, you're dealing with, Doug Kelley's father. Your story, the story that you tell here, it's got some real twists and turns here. And we know that Kelley's has this really unfortunate demise. Is there a pressure on you as a historian, as an author, to how does that relate to you as you're writing? Are you keeping this family in mind? What happens?
Well, the family, the extent of the family that I dealt with was just Doug, because all of his siblings had died by then, and Dr. Kelley was dead. Doug's mother, Dookie, had also died about 10 years before, and so it was just Doug. And Doug is, to me, he's the hero of the story, because he's unusually intelligent and perceptive and emotionally accessible, a fantastic guy. I consider him a good friend now. We're still in touch regularly. And so he took the role of kind of a guide for me as I was going through his father's materials, and then interviewing Doug himself for his memories. He was 10 years old when his father, the demise that you referred to, was that he took his own life on January 1st, 1958. So Doug was present, and he could set the whole scene for me. And he, even though he was only 10 when his father died, he had a lot of thoughts and impressions about his father and his motivations and what his life disappointments were, and why he drank so much and had a bad marriage, and what had happened in his career after Nuremberg, which was really a strong downward spiral. So Doug was essential, and Doug, he in a sense, he left me alone. He let me interpret things how I wanted. He read my manuscript at the end, and he told me he didn't agree with some things in it, some interpretations in it, but he agreed with most of it, and he thought it was great. So he didn't interfere at all.
For people coming to this book, and frankly to this film, this is really a standoff between two men, especially on screen here. Can we talk a little bit about who these two men? You just introduced us a little bit to Douglas Kelley, but let's also talk about Hermann Göring and who this man was. Listen, I'm an Americanist. I get Nazi names thrown at me, and I get them confused all the time about who is this guy, who's the Reichsmarshal, Marshal, and so forth. Who are these two men when we first encounter them on screen and also in your book?
I'll start with Göring. It's a name that may be familiar to some people, but probably not overly familiar. Hermann Göring was, for almost all of World War II, Hitler's successor, the second in line. And he held a multitude of titles and roles in the Nazi government. So he was, you mentioned Reichsmarshal. That's a military rank, and the very highest in Germany. In fact, he was the only one who held that rank. It's like being a 6-star general. And he was also the president of the Reichstag, the legislative body in Germany. He was the commander of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. He was in charge of several 4-year plans that in Germany that focused on rearming and the economy. He even, because of his interest in the outdoors and love of hunting, he was the minister of forestry and in game in Germany, all kinds of roles. He had grown up in a well-to-do German family, influential. His dad was a diplomat, and he was a war hero during the First World War. He was a fighter pilot ace. And but like a lot of German veterans after that war, he's left at loose ends. What's he going to do now? What are we going to do now? That's what he was thinking. And for many, if not most, of these German veterans of war, the Weimar government wasn't it. It didn't satisfy them. This is the government that developed in Germany during the 1920s. And so he and many of his fellow vets started looking for alternatives. And there were all these extreme right-wing groups that were sprouting in Germany at that time. So in the early 20s, Göring went in Munich, went to a meeting of one of those new groups, the National Socialist Party, and he heard a speech by Hitler, liked what he heard, but what he liked as well was the fact that this was a very small political organization and that someone with Göring's intelligence and drive could rise to the top very fast. So he was, from the start, he was an opportunist, and that's what he did. And he did rise to the top. By the early 30s, he was a member of the Reichstag, representing the National Socialists. And then when Hitler came to power a little later, he took on all these roles in the government. So he was, after the war, he was arrested on the day the war ended and brought with many of his colleagues to this town in called Mondorf in Luxembourg, where a hotel had been refurbished into a prison that the Allies called Ashcan. And they were held there for a while and then sent to Nuremberg for trial. So he was there with 21 of his highest ranking cronies.
Mm-hmm. We have Russell Crowe in this role. As you were watching this film develop over the course of, I think you said 14 years or so, were you surprised when you saw Crowe get attached to this? Like, I mean, what were your thoughts, and what do you think about his performance? Like, what does he get right here?
Well, I was surprised that the movie was happening. It happened suddenly.
Right.
It was at the end. I know Crowe was attached to the movie earlier, but I didn't know about it. And things started really coming together quickly at the end of 2023. Mm-hmm. And so I really like Russell Crowe's performance. One of his earlier performances is a standout in my mind. Also, another history-related movie, A Beautiful Mind, where he plays the mathematician, economist John Nash. That's a wonderful movie, and he was fantastic in it. So I was happy, very happy to see him in the role of Hermann Göring, and he really embodies Göring. He's frightening. And he's able to capture both the charming aspects of Göring. You know, Göring was funny, and people generally liked him, and he loved his family and all that. But he was frightening too. He lacked conscience. He lacked remorse. He was a narcissist. All of those terrible things. So Kelley's role in Nuremberg was what he was told to do was to assess the 22 defendants in this first trial to see if they were mentally fit to stand trial. The legal definition of mental fitness was quite low. All it meant was, can they understand the charges against them? Can they participate in their own defense? And do they know right from wrong? So they all qualified for that, but Kelley, understanding that he was in this unique position, one of the first military psychiatrists ever, maybe the first, placed among war criminal defendants from another country. He saw this as an opportunity to do a lot more. And what he really wanted to do was to develop this project to determine whether these defendants had in common some kind of psychiatric disorder that could account for their crimes and their heinous behavior before and during the war. And that's what he set out to do. And that's what he spent his 8-9 months in Nuremberg doing.
Were there surprises? I think it's easy to go, wow, we're gonna study Göring, right? He's this horrible, arch villain in world history. But were there surprises you had in learning about Kelley himself and how this experience changed the man? Did it lay out in front of you as you were going through his files? Like, did you see a change in him?
Yes, there was a definite change. But what struck me first about Kelley, and as I learned more about Göring, was that these two men were a lot alike. They were both highly intelligent. They were both very confident. They would never admit doing any wrong, and to a fault. They believed in themselves. And so I think the connection that they made, and Kelley spent more time with Göring than any of the other defendants, was a recognition of that. They both felt this. They didn't become friends, but they may have developed a mutual admiration of a kind because they were alike. When I have talked with Doug, the son, about this relationship, we have joked a lot that it's like King Kong versus Godzilla. These were both very strong, manipulative guys who knew how to get what they wanted, and they both proceeded to do that. But the change that Kelley underwent had to do with his conclusions. He concluded that there was no psychiatric disorder that the Nazi leaders shared, that in fact they were all normal, or they fell within a normal range of personality types. And this was even more disturbing to Kelley than discovering a disorder would have been, because it meant that the end of this war and the end of the trials, all of that, wasn't going to stop people like that, because people with authoritarian impulses, opportunists, desire to seize power and exercise power over others, there are always people like that around us, everywhere, in every country, every era. It's just part of the human community. And so the big change in Kelley was understanding that, seeing his own country, seeing the United States with new eyes when he returned. He was struck by the political power in the U.S. South of the segregationist politicians there, governors, senators, members of Congress, and how they used techniques very much like the Nazis. And so he began speaking out about that and warning people, and he even developed a plan to keep democracy safe in America and to protect us all from authoritarians.
He was too early for a podcast, apparently. But I have to ask you, this idea of the banality of evil, and obviously when we talk about Nuremberg, it's always Nuremberg. There's a risk. I feel, Jack, sometimes that we might think of that it's too easy to apply Nuremberg to situations. I was just following orders. I was just, it's, and I think that's the reason why the book is so important, is because we get to go back and revisit this again. Do guys like Göring and these people that Kelley is encountering, do they know what they're doing is wrong? Or are they legitimately just following orders from higher on up? I mean, there's some kind of moral equation here, right?
Well, many of these guys were at the top, so they were not following orders, they were issuing orders. And wrong or right, I don't think was really a question that was part of their equation. What was in their equation was effective or not, and will it increase power? And how do I use the opportunities open to me now as a powerful official or military man in this government to my benefit and advantage? So that's what it was about to them. That phrase you mentioned, banality of evil, that came afterwards. That was a phrase that Hannah Arendt coined for one specific war criminal, Adolf Eichmann. I don't think it applies to these guys. I don't think anyone could look at Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, Albert Speer, and say these men are banal. They're ordinary, commonplace. They were not. They were memorable specimens. They were not paper pushers like Eichmann, murderous paper pushers. They were murderous people who made things happen. So I don't think Kelley would agree with that expression, the banality of evil, applies at all to the Nuremberg defendants.
I think one of the frustrating things about watching this film, and it comes through in the book as well, is how charismatic Göring is or was, right? It's easy in the United States, 70, 80 years removed, to go, these guys are completely evil. I hate them all. They're nothing but monsters. And then you see this incredibly brilliant, sophisticated performance by Crow going, geez, this guy's funny. He's smart. He knows how to talk to people. It's understandable how he could rise so quickly, right? What's the importance here of talking of like really pulling back these real layers on these guys and say, wait, this is not just a black and white thing here. This
is an important point because Kelley came to believe that they were not monsters. And he was criticized, and I have been criticized in my book for humanizing these men. And you know what? They're humans. It doesn't take much to humanize them because they're human beings, which means that they have motivations and what they're doing occurs in a context. To think of them as monsters or as just evil doers is not just a misrepresentation, but it holds them less accountable, I think, because what do monsters do? Monstrous things. They can't help it. But someone who makes a choice to do bad things can be held responsible and should be. And that was the great glory of these Nuremberg trials, that the Allied countries, France, Britain, US, and USSR, got together to hold them accountable. First time it ever happened that an international tribunal judged war criminals from another country. So I think Kelley's conclusions and his work is really important and applies so well to what we're seeing today in many countries, including our own.
Yeah, when I hear the criticism about humanizing a guy like Goering, right, or these other horrible people, it's like, is maybe the person using those expressions just simply uncomfortable with what the human condition is, which sadly, Jack, as I look around, thinks humans are capable of doing some really awful things, which is what Goering. It seems like it just makes us uncomfortable to wrestle with these ideas.
Right. And understandably, back at this time, this 6-year-long, horrible, bloody war full of death had just ended. These trials were going on. The United Nations began. People had felt a lot of hope for the UN. Nobody wanted to think that this was going to continue in different guises and at different times in the future. That's why the book that Kelley wrote after his time in Nuremberg, which was titled 22 Cells in Nuremberg, flopped, because that was his thesis, that these men aren't monsters, they're normal. That doesn't mean everyone acts like them, but that there are people who do, and it's not the result of disease or monstrousness or anything like that. It's part of the human condition, and we have to be aware of them and prepared for them. Now, in Nuremberg, Kelley had a colleague, a psychologist named Gustav Gilbert. He also examined the same defendants, and he came to different conclusions using the diagnostic tools they had available at the time. He believed that some of the German leaders were psychotic, and that accounted for their behavior. But I don't think there's much agreement on that nowadays, and I think it's much better to believe that they're accountable, responsible, and humans.
Was Kelley under pressure by the American brass to come up with certain findings? Did he talk about the weight of his investigations into these men? Like, was he being pushed one way or another, or did he feel that kind of strain on his own work?
His overseers in Nuremberg, which were the court and the prosecution to some degree, and also the U.S. military, had no idea what he was really doing. They thought he was pursuing his task, this mental fitness question. And so all of this he was doing on his own, under the radar. And so when he left Nuremberg in January 1946, he took all this stuff with him and started writing. And no one in official positions knew that he was doing this.
I want to ask you a little bit about your work when you're doing the research on a guy like Kelley. You become super close with his writings, his thoughts, and things like that. Does that affect how you judge him or critique him over time? Like, how do you, as a historian, as a scholar, as an arbiter of the story, how do you maintain like a distance and ability to like really kind of remove yourself from how you feel about a certain person when you're researching them?
Well, I would have answered that question differently 20 years ago, but over time, I've come to believe that distance, neutrality, forget it. It's not important, and it's not possible either. And so in my books, I do not like to come out and make moral, ethical declarations. I much prefer to present what I present and let the reader come to those conclusions. But that doesn't mean I'm acting as a neutral storyteller. Instead, I am, like a prosecuting attorney, I am amassing evidence. And in a story like this, there could have been 100 books written about Douglas Kelley, emphasizing different things, focusing on different things. And I chose the focus that I did because it answered the questions that I thought were important. And the important questions about Kelley was, for me, what was the relationship between Kelley and the defendants, especially Göring? What did he find about them? And then we alluded earlier to Dr. Kelley's suicide. Hermann Göring also committed suicide just before he was scheduled to be hanged by swallowing a cyanide capsule. Dr. Kelley also died by swallowing cyanide. And so what was the connection between these two suicides of men who knew each other? And so I'm a guide, but I'm not telling people what to think. But I am curating how the story goes and what I show, leaving out all that isn't really important to the questions that I'm trying to pursue.
You were on my buddy Waitman's podcast, and Waitman is really important to me for introducing to me a concept that I think he coined while he was on my pod the very first time he was on, called rivet counting, which is where we're not interested on this pod, at least as historians, of saying, oh, there were this many tanks at this battle and there were this many. Like, I don't care about that, right? We understand that these are not documentaries, that there are dramatizations, and we're trying to tell these larger truths. You've seen the film 3 times. You're intimately familiar with this story. For someone who's going to watch this film, maybe even for the first time, Jack, I guess maybe the question is, what do you really like about this movie? What's this movie doing well? What should we really, as we're watching, go, hey, they're like, can you tip us off to stuff we should appreciate as we're watching this?
Well, if you're going to see Nuremberg once, I would suggest focusing on the relationship and interplay between Rami Malek as Dr. Kelley and Russell Crowe as Hermann Göring. Now, there is another subplot in the movie, which was not a subplot in my book. This is something that James Vanderbilt added, and I think it makes it a better movie. And that's about Robert Jackson, the U.S. Supreme Court justice who became the chief American prosecutor at this trial, and all that he went through to make the trial happen, and then to prosecute Göring in particular. So maybe for a second viewing, that might be a good thing to focus on. But in my mind, it's not a war movie. It's not a Holocaust movie. It's a movie about tension and conflict between these two formidable men and how they resolve it, or how it resolves for them. There are other important characters, but to me, that's the heart of the story.
When we go back and look at like World War II, we see propaganda everywhere, German, Japanese, American, so forth. Can we talk a little bit, though, about Göring's manipulation of truth and maybe some parallels between how power and truth operate between, say, the 1940s and, say, even today, all the way into the United States?
Sure. Göring went into this trial knowing that he would probably be found guilty and would probably be executed at the end of it. So his goal for the trial was not to establish his innocence. It was something different. And his goal for the trial was to establish the legitimacy of the Nazi government. So when he was on the witness stand, and this is shown in the movie, he tried to show that he and his colleagues had acted not out of hatred, anti-Semitism, barbarity, anything like that, but out of patriotism for their country and out of loyalty to Hitler also. And he told Kelley that even though he might be executed in the end, that years afterwards, there might be a lot of statues erected in Germany honoring Göring and his fellow leaders. That didn't happen, fortunately. It hasn't happened yet, anyway. And so that was the propagandistic kind of goal that Göring had for the trial, to influence public opinion. The reason why that didn't work is that Göring's plan was overwhelmed by a huge mass of evidence that showed otherwise, that showed that the intention of the government was genocidal, and that the Germans entered into treaties with the intention of breaking them. Things like that. The Allies themselves had propagandistic goals for the trial too, not just to convict these war criminals, but also to show the world through the trial everything, or as much as they could cram in, that had happened, and to try and prevent something like this from happening again, and from, instead of shooting the Germans in secret in some prison courtyard, to make a public display of their guilt. And that has mostly succeeded, I think.
Are there lessons from Nuremberg, Jack, that you think we're in danger of forgetting?
Well, yeah, there's a few that come to mind, but one is, this is something that I'm stuck on. And this trial happened because the United States and the three other allies worked together to create an international tribunal. We have today an international criminal court that can address crimes like these. But the problem is that our country no longer supports that court. In fact, it sanctions international criminal court justices who come to who reach judgments that the U.S. doesn't like. It economically sanctions them. So the U.S. has moved from being an advocate and a big force behind these international prosecutions to being in the shadows, not helping at all. And I think we should reach for in the cause of justice and for the reputation of our country, we should return to the old role, even if it means that some Americans will be caught in war crimes or whatever they get prosecuted for. If they're guilty, they should be brought to justice. So that's one. And then the other is a little bit related to something I said earlier, that, we have these people among us, that war crimes, of course, have continued after World War II, crimes against humanity, every day, probably. Genocide, we see it today in Gaza, and it has occurred in other places. And we need to recognize that and behave accordingly. Now, the International Criminal Court has indicted leaders of Israel's government, leaders of Hamas, for crimes they've committed, but because they've been accused of committing, but because of the lack of international cooperation, someone like Netanyahu can visit our country and not be turned over to the court, even though he has been indicted. And the same goes for the Hamas leaders. I hope that people will see the movie, read the book, and understand that these things didn't end in 1945. They're with us now.
Yeah, I have to ask you about the connections to what's going on in Gaza, because the United States post-World War II is fighting against genocide, or at least a portion of it. It's also fighting its own war against imperialism while defending its own imperialistic, its own empire. And this brings me to questions, Jack, because I understand the United States has had its own genocidal campaigns against indigenous people here in North America, and then is prosecuting these people behind this attempted genocide in Europe. And now it's standing by while this thing goes on in Gaza. The United States is moving towards Greenland. And even though there's a book over our great imperialist Theodore Roosevelt over my right shoulder here, has the United States kind of forgotten, Jack, who it is? Like, where is this the same country 80 years after this war? I look at where we were in, say, 1946, and I look at us now in 2026, and I can't make heads or tails of this. It doesn't feel like the same people with the same values.
Well, it isn't. The quick answer is it isn't the same country, and the values aren't the same. As far as Gaza goes, people often get into arguments about whether this is genocide or is it not genocide, not realizing that in the United States and in many other countries, there is a legal definition of genocide. And that is the definition that's laid out in the United Nations Convention on Genocide from 1948. It was an outgrowth of the Nuremberg Trials. And this convention explains that there are five conditions. And if any one of them is satisfied, then it's a genocide. And I don't see how any reasonable person can look at events in Gaza and say that it doesn't meet at least three out of the five. And so it's an international agreement. The United States signed on to it decades ago. Israel signed on to it as one of its first acts of state. And it should be binding. Anyway, there shouldn't be arguments about what constitutes a genocide. And the convention doesn't allow for circumstances. So, for instance, self-defense is not a justification for genocide. Military campaigns are not a justification for genocide. What happens is what defines genocide, not what the possible excuses might be.
We look back at this story, and this is one of the things I loved about go back and revisiting Nuremberg. The first thing you think about is the trial of Nuremberg. It still, as a film, still remains so large in our imaginations, right? And then we get to see this different aspect because there's all these other things floating around. There are all these people who are having these very real responses to their experiences, including, I think what's fascinating is Douglas Kelley's experience, how this thing changes him, right? What do you want us to take out of this relationship between Kelley and Göring?
Well, what Kelley took out of it is that his beloved medical specialty, psychiatry, couldn't explain people like Göring. And so this is part of what set him on this self-destructive course for the remainder of his life. And if psychiatry couldn't, then what could? And that's why at the end of his academic career, Kelley turned to criminology, more of a social science approach to the question. And when he died, he was a professor at University of California, Berkeley, not in psychiatry, but in criminology. And I hope that readers, viewers of the movie will take away this humanizing impulse. We resist the urge to respond emotionally to people, their opponents, and to understand that behind whatever any person does, there are motivations. They may be bad motivations or even evil motivations, but there are motivations, and they are acting as people. And we may not like all the things that people do, but they do them, and it doesn't help to ignore that fact.
Jack, we spent all this time talking about the past. What comes next for you?
Well, I have a new book that I have finished that will be coming out this fall, in the fall of 2026. It's called The Case of the Autographed Corpse. And it's a crime narrative, a historical crime narrative about an Apache medicine man living on the Fort Apache Reservation in Arizona, who in 1933 was convicted of murdering his wife on the reservation. And it was a wrongful conviction. The evidence presented against him was inaccurate, wrong. He didn't do it, yet he was sentenced to life in prison. And he tried all kinds of ways to get out of prison during his sentence. Finally, after 20 years, he wrote to a famous mystery writer of that time named Earl Stanley Gardner. He wrote all the Perry Mason mystery books. And Gardner, as it turns out, was a trial lawyer before he became a novelist, and had an organization going called the Court of Last Resort, which was that era's, this is the 1950s now, that era's Innocence Project. They took on the cases of people who had been wrongfully convicted of serious crimes. So together, Gardner and the medicine man, whose name was Silas John Edwards, worked together to reinvestigate the case 20 years later, did so, and sprang him from prison. He got out. And so that's a story that blew me away when I first learned about it, and I've wanted to tell it for a long time.
All right. That's not too far away from where I'm at here in Colorado. So I'm going to have you back on when this book comes out, because this sounds right up my alley. It sounds cool. And I've read your writing, sir. You do good stuff. Like this
Well,
book.
thank you.
Well, this book, I felt like as I was reading it, just kind of played out in front of me. I mean, it's just, I felt like I was reading a movie, if that makes any sense at all. I really enjoyed it. Not as much. Well, I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to you. I have to tell you, this was really, Jack, this was really delightful. I was really looking forward to talking to you. I seen the book, read the book, seen the film, and I was really looking forward to sitting down and talking to you today. And this has just been delightful, man, over some really hard stuff.
Well, the feeling's mutual. It was a really good conversation, and I've enjoyed all your thoughtful questions, and some of them stretch me a bit. That's good. But now I'll know how to answer them next time someone asks. And I really appreciate your interest, and I hope your listeners get something good out of all this.
Well, I'm sure they will, and they're going to get something good, because I want to have you back when the book comes out this fall. Is that correct?
That's right.
We'll do it. We'll do it up, Jack. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.
And that's a wrap here at Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Thank you so very much to our guest, Jack L. High, for coming in today. Jack, that was an amazing conversation with just an amazing scholar about a great book and a great film. Thank you so very much for being here. Thank you, of course, to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show run on time. And most of all, thank you to all of you for continuing to support Reckoning with Jason Herbert. You can keep doing so by sharing this podcast, by posting on social media and sharing it with your friends. If you like the pod, you can leave comments, hopefully good ones, and leave reviews. That'll help the algorithms and boost us that much more. So thank you guys so much for being here. We've got some amazing pods coming your way next week as well. And we'll talk to you then. Ciao for now.